Well, as we've been talking about, you know, looking at cultures today, we hear it from everybody, right? We feel it ourselves. People are wondering, right? Why does it feel so different? And post the pandemic, especially. Well, part of it is we all have work at home now, right? Most of us, if not all of us, are experiencing it's almost flipped entirely, right? Where now we're asking ourselves the question, well, what do I allow into my own home, right? How do I want to feel when I'm at work? And now work is blended with home. And so we ask ourselves this kind of larger question, right? Why are cultures broken? Why is this the case? And leaders are wrestling with this question, uh, employees, everybody. And there's what we end up seeing is a strange kind of compilation of things, which is we see a lot of layoffs today, at least in the tech world. And in some ways, right, leaders and organizations are flexing their ability to make those hard decisions. But wasn't it just about a year ago when we were all most, if not all, we were hearing was the power was in the employees, right, to make the decisions. We heard about quiet quitting, and so this power struggle from one pendulum swinging to the next. Who has the power, right? Employees or employers? And this is part of the problem, right? Why cultures are broken. And so we experience cultures, and we show up in the office, whether virtually or in person, and it feels very siloed. It feels disconnected. It may feel bureaucratic. And leaders are also recognizing this. They're feeling like they know something's wrong. There's a movement afoot, but they don't always know what to do about it. And so when we look at ourselves, our role in HR, it's asking ourselves these questions. How are we going to impact or influence this differently? And so really it poses a larger question for us on a personal level. And this goes to work life, and in our lives. How do we lead our lives? And it's a question about, is the future self-made or shared? And if we look at the history of this, and there's an archetype in the business world that we see a lot, and I've enjoyed this show as much as anybody. But you look at the Shark Tank, right? And how true has it been in the past that leaders have showed up in that mode of being a shark, and the people that have left this kind of employee role to become an entrepreneur have done it in many ways to become that shark, right? To build an empire of their own. And so we have this kind of silo building that has occurred over time. And yet the future, people are in our hearts and minds, what we're demanding is more empathy, right? More compassion. We don't want the consumer, the feeling like we're going to be consumed by this shark leader, or they're going to squeeze all the profits out of us, or kick us to the curb. We're not interested in that. And so the future is shared. And the question is how are we going to share the future with intention? And this becomes the core question of our times. And for any leader thinking about or listening, any HR leader, any of us, right? This is our baseline. This is our experience in our lives, consciously or subconsciously. We all experience fear, right? We have moments of doubt. We have questions that we're wrestling with on a personal level. We may wonder, how am I ever going to deal properly with this situation that I now face? Now, change, it used to be we would have a change, and we could anticipate it maybe a little more. Post-pandemic, it feels like everything is spinning, right? It used to be that, wow, that was a singularity. There was something that happened that was out of the ordinary, right? An anomaly. But these singularities have accelerated, right? Peter Thiel says, write your 10-year plan and go out and accomplish it in 6 months. Well, we've all had our 10-year plans handed to us in 6 months. And what are we going to do about it, right? So it puts us in this state of fear. And the real answer to this is being brave. And what's happened in the past is we've looked at this as optimization, right? Or hacks and hustle, and trying to kind of drive our way, towards this future alone. And in a sense, it's not bad because it's progress, right? We're getting out of a state of fear. And, you could see leaders doing this. There's kind of a superhero mythology. They may take on a lot on their own, even to the breaking point, right? And they get burned out. We see people doing this in their own function, right, or in silos. But braving it alone is not enough. And it's in the future, it's about braving it together. Now, you may be wondering, where have we seen this work well? Well, we've spent time with companies like Apple, who they charted this course themselves. They went from think, which IBM did well, to think different. And that's how Apple moves their culture. But the work we did with them and looking at how do they take AirPods to the next level? How do they take iPhones to the next level? How do they collaborate more horizontally? How do they get better at partnering and co-creation? It was not just thinking different, but working different together. And so as we work and are brave together in the work we do, us as HR, working with leaders, how are we going to be brave together with leaders? How are we going to show up in a way? We talk about wanting a seat at the table, but this is a whole different conversation. This is how are we looking at the first principles of design, which is, you look at what they've done with launching rockets, and landing them back from the moon safely. Well, they didn't go about it with we need some aluminum, we need some different parts. They start with first principles. And this is the first principle, which is if you start with, let's be brave together, right? In our personal lives, what's the culture you bring in your life, right? With your family, with your friends, what culture are you creating all around you? And is it co-creative, right? So here's a big shift. What if we influenced leaders to think completely differently about the employee-employer relationship? What if they shifted their thinking, say slightly, it's actually revolutionary, into these are co-creators. These employees, this team, this organization, these are all co-creators. What would that one thing do to change the whole dynamics of the organization? And I'll tell you, there are plenty of organizations that do this extremely well. Apple is one. Pixar is one. The book Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull captures this notion of brain trust, and they do this very well. And so this is the notion of how do we be brave together? How do we lead by design? How do we spark creativity in our teams, in ourselves personally, right? The future is creative, but it's especially co-creative. And it requires us to be brave in ways that we haven't before. And so the question for us personally is, how are we going to do this together, right? Being brave alone in a silo only gets us so far, right? We become, more like the shark, perhaps, right? And we feel alone, right? There's a mental health crisis before the pandemic. Imagine what it's like now, right? How alone people feel, and they're in virtual meetings, on Zoom. The rising generation is getting a completely different experience with work. And so it's incumbent upon us to lean into these questions and ask ourselves, how are we going to shape culture differently? Now, it can be done. We've seen it. We've influenced and partnered with tech companies and other companies to do this. Take one example I'll share with you. A tech company, they're looking at a virtual offsite. And you can imagine, Zoom for anything longer than an hour is heavy. What we did was we reimagined that whole experience. And we did 3 simple exercises. One was framing up a story, which was, what is the story of your career in your life? And putting Post-it notes on a Miro board. And then they shared these experiences, these stories, and they found they had things in common. That lasted about an hour and a half or 2 hours. Then we did a retrospective and talked about what are the things they've created in the past as a team. And then the last part of it was the future perspective. What do they want to build in the future together? This went on for 8 hours on a Zoom. And you can imagine that is a long time, but they were so engaged and so excited because we designed it with intention. They wanted to continue the conversation. And this can be done. So we can be brave together. We can influence the future. We can shape it in a co-creative way. And I'm so excited for this because, you think about what Einstein said, Albert Einstein, imagination is more important than knowledge. It's the preview of life's coming attractions. And I know that's true. And I'm excited to help shape that future with you, with the organizations that you're a part of, and excited to continue this conversation.